Hello, everyone. I hope people can hear me. If there's a problem, please write it in your chat box. So people are joining in. We have some participants who are sometimes late, and that's okay. We give them time to join in. My name is Shireen, and I'm from Peace Vigil, the organization which is bringing to you today's webinar. Is caste a thing of the past? We are delighted to have as our speaker today, Subhash Gathari, a long-time left activist, author, and translator. Sir, we are very happy you're with us today. Thank you so much for your time. I'm sure everyone's going to learn a lot from you. And we are very hopeful that this webinar is going to go a long way in creating consciousness and also giving us activists strength to keep fighting against the caste system and casteism. Among Mr. Subhash Gathari's books are Godse's Children, Hindutva Terror in India, The Saffron Condition, Charvak Ke Varis, Ambedkar Ani Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangha, and Pahad Se Uncha Admi, which is actually a book for kids. If you have kids, you get this book and read it to them. Before we start, I want to tell you that Subhash writes in English, Hindi, and Marathi. So he has a good grasp of 3 languages. I would like to remind people that this is a place of learning. So that means we welcome questions. Feel free to put your questions in the chat function, and depending on the flow of the conversation, we will take the questions either at the end or in between, depending on the flow. Also, I must remind everyone that disagreements are very normal. They're actually also healthy. But we must remain respectful towards each other. Please, no personal abuse, no foul language. Otherwise, we will have to mute you and we'll have to ask you to leave. Also, I would like to share this picture with you, very important. Before we begin, for people who may have forgotten what the caste system looks like or may not have much idea, this is what the caste system pyramid looks like. And because we have participants who have visual disabilities, and also this particular webinar is going to be put on a podcast, I will be reading this pyramid out to you. I'm not just giving it to you. I will explain what it has. So it's a pyramid. At the top are Brahmins, which is a class of priests. Then the Kshatriyas, kings, rulers, warriors. Of course, this is not something that's always there. I mean, sometimes Brahmins can also be kings and rulers, and then the third category is of Vaisyas or Vaishyas, as we say, merchants, craftsmen, landowners, skilled workers. Then the Shudra or the Sudra, who are the farm workers and the so-called unskilled workers and servants. And at the very end of this pyramid, actually outside of the pyramid, is the so-called untouchables, the street sweepers, people who clean up the human and animal waste and deal with dead bodies, also known as outcasts. So without further ado, I'm going to request my colleague, Sameer Dosani from Peace Vigil, to start the conversation with Subhashji. And once again, I welcome all of you, and I'm very happy to have you in this webinar. And especially, I welcome Mr. Subhash Gathari.
Subhashji, hello. Sorry, can you say something? I'm just not sure that your microphone is on, Subhashji.
Oh, hi, Sameer. Hi, Sameer. It's fine.
Thank you so much. Subhashji, if it's okay, I thought we could start with a discussion of caste in ancient times. And I really have 2 questions. So caste is this system, as Shini has put on the screen. It's a kind of a social hierarchy, and it gets codified around the time of this so-called jurist Manu, with the Manu Smriti. There are two criticisms of this sort of the relevance of caste, even in ancient times and today, that I want you to address. The first is by apologists for caste. So some people say, look, this was just a kind of a, the way that a European tradesperson or a European, for example, a blacksmith would teach his son or his daughter, usually his son, how to be a blacksmith. In that same way, the caste system was just that kind of, traditional learning passed down from one generation to the next. So that is one objection I'd like you to address. There's a second objection, which is that, look, caste isn't that relevant. Because if we look, for example, at the dynasties, it's not true that the people who founded, for example, the Nanda dynasty, those people were actually Dalits. And in fact, many other dynasties are founded by people who aren't Kshatriyas. So can you address these two objections to treating caste as a sort of entry point to understanding our discussion?
I feel that both the questions which both the objections or which the people have raised about caste, I feel that there is an element of truth in what the second question was. Second says that caste is that not that caste has not been that relevant also, because when you talk of Maurya or when you talk of Kanishka dynasty, you really find that despite belonging to what we call as backward caste in today's framework, they became rulers. So you can definitely find different examples in the history. But so there is an element of truth what he has been said. But if one looks at the larger picture of the caste system, which is still in existence today, one finds that these examples are there, have been there, and one cannot deny these examples. But we can say that they were exceptions. They were exceptions. So mainly the rulers were Brahmins or Kshatriya. If one looks at the history of the ancient history and the later history, so exceptions cannot put the point that even backwards. So the caste is irrelevant. So I think that what was the first question you were saying?
The first question was, you can imagine, I think I heard this argument by some modern apologists for caste. So people who are saying that, it's okay, caste is not such a big deal, because historically, it was not about a social hierarchy of domination. This is their argument. They say, no, historically it was about teaching one's children how to do one's work, that kind of thing. It was about intergenerational passing on of traditional knowledge.
So the apologists of caste system have always argued it that way, that it has not been, it's just a division of labor. It has been a division of labor that they have said. They have tried to sanitize the whole caste system in a very particular fashion. So, but actually, it's not that easy. Dr. Ambedkar said that it's not division of labor; it is division of laborers. So that is the complexity of the caste system. So the whole argument of only occupation, it doesn't hold good.
And maybe you can give us some more examples. For example, going to that text that is seen to have codified the caste system, the Manu Smriti. I believe when you say it's a division of peoples, it's like a very literal division of peoples, in the sense that I believe Dalits get different punishments, or Shudras get different punishments than Brahmins for basically the same crime. And there's certain things that are not a crime for one caste that are a crime for another caste. Can you talk a little bit about that within the Manusmriti?
The whole existence of Manusmriti is a fact. The Manusmriti, it was burned by Dr. Ambedkar, and it still exists today. It still exists today. What does Manusmriti tells us? Manusmriti tells us that the castes there are four varnas, and if a Brahmin commits a crime, Brahmin rapes by murder, even if he commits murder, then he can be penalized less. He can be, but if for the same crime, a Dalit will have to face punishment more. So the very fact that there is a greater inequality inherent in the Manusmriti, and which it even denied human rights, humanity to a large section of people. The Dalits were not even allowed to enter temples, God's abode. So that gradation of punishment, that gradation of that prohibitions, all those things were there in the Manusmriti. It was codified, and that's why Dr. Ambedkar had to burn it. And still today, we find that if one look at the occupations of different castes, what does one find? The Dalits are mostly still engaged in so-called demeaning or humiliating jobs. So in practical level, yes, we have abolished Manusmriti, but in a theoretical level with the constitution, but it still exists. So that is there, and all these arguments of that is not valid. So they are don't go ground.
Fantastic. I want to take the viewers and listeners on a little bit of a trip now, because we're going to go from ancient India to the time of the freedom struggle. And I want to talk specifically about the birth of this organization that we now know as the Sangh, the RSS, Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. What can you tell us about some of these figures who were involved in this? Why do you think that they pushed so hard to create this? A lot of BJP members today will say that they had, they say that they had one freedom fighter among their early ranks, and that was V.D. Savarkar. I don't know if you have any response to that. I guess ultimately my question is, this movement, this Hindutva movement, is it part of the independence movement, or is it something separate?
Yes, there have been activists associated with the Hindutva movement. Savarkar was definitely involved in freedom struggle. Part of his life, his youth, he was definitely involved in freedom struggle. But if you look at later part of his, the manner in which he was imprisoned, and the way he turned a sort of supporter of the Hindutva politics, the man who wrote the 1857 interesting book on the 1857 War of Independence, the way he became a proponent of Hindutva politics. So individuals you can definitely find in the Hindutva movement who participated in the independence struggle. But as a policy, if one looks at the policies of RSS, if one looks at the policies of the other Hindutva organizations, they did not have any policy to participate in the independence struggle. If one looks at the documents, available documents of Hedgewar, Golwalkar, and many people have written about it also. But whenever there were opportunities, 1942, the Quit India movement was started, and there were a section of RSS workers asked Golwalkar that they should be allowed to participate in the independence movement, but they were not allowed. So as a matter of policy, they did not participate, but individuals you can definitely find. Even Edgewar also participated in the independence movement, but he as a Congress activist, he participated as a Congress activist.
So I guess what I'd like to say, so if we can see, this may be sort of romanticizing the freedom struggle a little bit, but if we say that the struggle for India's independence was a struggle against a revolutionary struggle against imperialism and against and for socialism, right? Because that's what got enshrined in the Constitution ultimately. Is the RSS a revolutionary force, or is it a counter-revolutionary force?
Definitely. How does one look at an organization, whether it's revolutionary or not revolutionary? One looks at its ideology, one looks at its program, one looks at the organization structure, and what are its aims, and how does the organization is acting, in whose interest is acting. If an organization is acting for a section of the people, and is trying to divide people on the basis of caste and community. When the whole independence struggle was going on, anti-colonial struggle was going on, Hindus, Muslims, everyone was united in the struggle. And if the RSS or the Muslim League or the other organization only concentrated on a particular community, so they sort of hampered, they dampened the independence struggle, they acted against the independence struggle, objectively, they acted against the independence struggle. So they served directly or indirectly the colonial forces in by their silences, by their actions. So in overall, one can look at it as a counter-revolutionary, a reactionary force.
Fantastic. So just to summarize that, there was a danger, and the British knew this danger because, as we've learned on previous webinars featuring Dr. Jagmohan Singh, who's also joining us today. Thank you, Dr. Jagmohan Singh, for being here. We have discussed the history going back to 1857, and that the British were very afraid of a unified anti-imperialist movement. And so what I'm hearing from you, sir, is that the RSS played a role, along with other organizations, that maybe the Muslim League may have been also one of these organizations, that played a role in dividing the united front of secular forces or sort of socialist forces, anti-imperialist forces in India, such that Britain could maintain control for longer. Is that what you're saying, more or less?
Yeah. That's my argument. That's my argument. May it be the Hindutva, may it be the Muslim League, or all the community-based organizations, religious-based organizations, they serve the colonialists, they serve the imperialists.
Fantastic, fantastic. I wanted to ask you something, because you are from Maharashtra originally, you write in Marathi, and I wanted to ask you, a number of these people, they seem to be from Maharashtra originally. So I believe Golwalkar, Savarkar, Hedgewar, and a number of others are originally from Maharashtra. What is your analysis? And I believe they're from the upper castes, although I'm not 100% sure that all of them.
Brahmins.
Yeah, all of them are Brahmins, isn't it? So what is your analysis of why Maharashtra was a hotbed of this Hindutva ideology?
I have been arguing for a long time that the way one looks at RSS or the whole Hindutva philosophy, we need to revisit that because it's not just coincidence that if one looks at Maharashtra has the population of Muslims is less than 10% in Maharashtra, and Muslims were never dominant in Maharashtra. We had Shivaji Maharaj, and so they were never dominant. And despite this fact, you had Savarkar, you had Hedgewar, you had Golwalkar, and the tradition, the Balasaheb Thackeray, that tradition continues in Maharashtra of Hindutva politics. And my contention is that we cannot understand the genesis of RSS unless and until you look at Maharashtra's history. Maharashtra's history after 1857, mid-19th century, we had what we called as social revolutionary movement led by Mahatma Phule, Savitribai Phule, Fatima Sheikh. They led an interesting movement, a social revolutionary movement, and Gail Obed talks about it turns it as a cultural revolt. So one has to look at these two factors are there before us. We had the RSS. Many of the key leaders for the RSS are Brahmins and from Maharashtra. And we had a Maharashtra, in that very Maharashtra, we had the social revolutionary movement, which challenged Brahmanism. If one looks at Maharashtra, the Brahmins, the upper caste, dominated the Maharashtra politics, the society in such a way that Marathas and everyone was oppressed. So when Britishers came, for the first time, the Dalits and the women and the Shudras got right of education. So that's sort of the seeds of that cultural revolt were led by Mahatma Phule and his comrades. And one has to look at these two entities, these two struggles. And if one looks at Hedgewar's biography has been written by C.P. Bishikar. In Hindi, it is called as Sangha Vruksha Ke Beej. There he explains why he founded RSS. he explains two reasons for founding RSS: that the Muslims were becoming dominant, and the non-Brahmins were also becoming assertive. So after the death of Mahatma Phule, we had the non-Brahmin movement in Maharashtra, which challenged Brahminism discourses. So in a way, I always say that it's the Brahminical counter-revolution. The RSS or the Hindutva revolution, Hindutva idea is a Brahminical counter-revolution to establish supremacy.
So this is very interesting. So what I'm hearing, so first of all, just to say that there's one more Maharashtrian that I forgot to mention, and that is, of course, Nathuram Godse. So it's many people who are part of this movement from Maharashtra. And what I'm hearing you say is that actually that history goes back before all of these people were on the scene, before Savarkar and so on. We had Phule and some other people who were really part of these forces against what had been a very tight, hegemonic, Brahmanical society in Maharashtra. And the British colonialism, which we know is, had its, obviously it's not a good thing, but it had some upsides, and that was in some ways to expand the reach of education, which made the possibility of a sustained anti-Brahmin movement that much more powerful in Maharashtra. And so this is a very specific and sort of Maharashtra specific analysis that the RSS comes up in this space, not necessarily just as a tool of the British, but also as a way to assert Brahmanical superiority within that space. Am I getting you right?
Yeah, definitely. To re-establish the Brahminical supremacy, the emergence of RSS, we can link the emergence of RSS, emergence of the Hindutva idea. And what today also one can see, the core of RSS, core thinking in the RSS, is still Manuvad, one can say. They still believe in Manusmriti, but they may not claim it, but essentially that the idea is very much there. And when we had independence and when the idea to have a constitution was mooted by Dr. Ambedkar and Nehru, these people had opposed it, Savarkar as well as Golwalkar, that we should not have a new constitution. We already have a Manusmriti with us. So that core understanding is there still with the Hindutva people.
Yeah. So before we go to the next Maharashtrian I want to talk about, who is, you just mentioned Dr. Ambedkar, but before we get there, there's one thing I just want to clarify, because there are, if one reads the statements, especially of Savarkar, maybe not so much of Golwalkar and Hedgewar, one can somehow sense that at times he speaks against caste. At times he speaks as if, we need Hindu unity and caste is not going to be all that relevant and so on. And if we look in more modern times, we're going to get to later in this webinar, but there has been no problem forming alliances with scheduled castes, with tribes and so on, especially when it comes to doing violence and so on. So what is the analysis of how it can be both Brahmanical and try to bring Dalits and even like Buddhists and Jains, even people who can't be called Hindus by any stretch of the imagination, at times they want to stretch their tent so wide that it includes some of these people. Why do you think that is the case?
I'm just trying to understand what the question. So how you mean to say that? How, yeah, please.
So my question is that you can certainly find, if you read all the RSS documents, one can certainly find the thread of Brahmanism throughout it. But you also find in history that they align themselves with certain Dalit communities, with scheduled castes and tribes from time to time, even with Buddhists from time to time for electoral purposes.
Yeah.
So what is the analysis? How can it be both Brahmanical and trying to unite all the Hindus? How is that possible?
Yeah. So I think if one looks at the history of RSS, the first two Sarasanghachalas, Supremos, Hedgewar and Golwalkar, and then one should look at Devras. When Devras came to became a Supremo, 73, he became a RSS Supremo. He understood the limitations of the earlier approach of Hedgewar and Golwalkar. 1969, Golwalkar had given that famous interview to Navakal in the Marathi newspaper, where he had supported Manusmriti. And there was a lot of movement. There was a big movement in Maharashtra challenging Golwalkar's contention that how can you support Manusmriti when we have a new constitution? So the worldview of Golwalkar as well as Hedgewar, well, definitely they formally supported, formally talked of Manusmriti, and it was more Brahminical. But Devras understood that with this approach of keeping Dalits out of this ambit of RSS, the Hindus cannot gain strength. So he sort of changed his strategy. And in 73, we are told that he gave an interesting speech in Maharashtra, Pune. So he sort of tried to widen the idea of Hindutva. And in 73 only, he went to Nagpur, Diksha Bhumi, where Ambedkar was converted to Buddhism. So that was the first time in Sangha history that somebody went to the Diksha Bhumi. So he changed track. So they understood that Dalits and Shudras can be used against Muslims. So that way they tried to widen the ambit of RSS. And they have been very successful in doing that.
Fantastic, thank you so much. We're going to get to that history a little bit later. Let's go back to the freedom struggle and to this figure of Baba Saheb Ambedkar, who becomes such an important figure. And I think one way maybe to enter the story of Ambedkar is with the story of the Mahar Satyagraha. And I don't know if you can tell us that story, sir, just to begin the discussion on Ambedkar.
Yeah. The Mahar is a place in Konkan, and there was a big public pond. They called as Chaudhar Talab. Chaudhar is Marathi testy. So it was called as Chaudhar Talab. And the Mahad municipality had passed a resolution that this public pond will be open to Dalits. So that was the resolution of the Mahad municipality, and the government, Bombay government, the Britishers, a section of Britishers were also favor of that resolution. So this, when Mahad municipality had passed this resolution, but still the status quo was maintained. The Dalits were not allowed in the public pond. Animals could be allowed, dogs could be allowed, but Dalits were not allowed. So Ambedkar gave a call, go to Mahad and drink water from the public pot. So 19th and 20th March, the Mahad Satyagraha took place. If you go to Maharashtra, they call it Pani mein aag lagi thi, that sort of the water caught fire. So the thousands of people under the leadership of Dr. Ambedkar went to that public pond and they drank water. That was a really big move by Dr. Ambedkar. And in the second phase of this movement, when they went back again to Maharashtra in December, they burned Manusmriti. This whole Mahar Satyagraha, the memories of Mahar Satyagraha are still etched in the minds of Maharashtrian Dalits and all democratic forces. So it's a very interesting moment in Dalit history.
Fantastic. So let's talk a little bit more about Dr. Ambedkar. So we have someone in the figure of Dr. Ambedkar, who is, first of all, he himself is a Dalit. Secondly, he's a Dalit who has managed to get a very good education in the US and in the UK, amongst other places. Third, as you described, he also seems to be a mass leader. He has mass movements that he is definitely in a leadership position of. And fourth, he also plays a role in various negotiations with the British and ultimately ends up being part of the, especially we call him the father of the Constitution. He played a very key role in drafting the Constitution. So we'll get to the Constitution in a minute, but my question just is, if you can talk us a little bit about the story that I just mentioned, because it seems so incongruous. He really grew up as a Dalit. He really grew up as not a rich person, but he was able to do, PhDs from Columbia University and so on. So talk us through a little bit about how he lived, how this person, it sounds almost fictional now when we hear about it. How did this person exist?
My contention is that he was the most learned person in British India. more learned than even Mahatma Gandhi and Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, more learned. So he had degrees from Columbia as well as London School of Economics. So that he was a great scholar, great scholar. His own personal library had more than 20,000 books. So he's a great scholar in his but simultaneously, very interesting combination that not only was he was a scholar, but he was a great activist also. And he could mobilize the whole community for the cause of emancipation. And if one looks at the history of Dr. Ambedkar, very interesting. His father was a military man, and he served the Britishers. So in the cantonment areas, despite being a Dalit, the cantonment areas where the military used to stay, where his family used to stay, he did not face caste discrimination as it is faced by ordinary Dalits outside society, the society. So he grew in that ambience, and since he was a very bright student, he could he could score good in the matriculation exams, and he was awarded scholarship. So Sayajirao Holkar, the king of Baroda, gave him scholarship. He found that and that he's a very bright student and he need to be supported. He was a social reformer type of king. So with that scholarship, he went to Columbia, and then so there he completed his study, and then once he came back to India, then the Shahu Maharaj, a king of Kolhapur, he had organized a big program felicitating him, and he said that the Dalits have got a new leader, 1920 Mangaon Conference we say. So his talent was noticed by his elders, and they sort of supported him, and when he came back to India for the next 35 years, he was actively associated with the movement. He led it theoretically and as well as practically. And there are different phases in the life of Dr. Ambedkar. The big struggle he led was the Mahar Satyagraha, which we are talking about. And in 30s, 2-3 major struggles took place. Like the most important struggle was for the rights of peasants, Khod Pratha ke, there was the struggle against feudal lords. So thousands of Dalits and other people, communists, that was a big demonstration took place in Bombay, in opposing in support of the peasantry. And 1937, Manmad, he addressed an interesting conference of railway workers, Dalit workers, and he pointed out there are two enemies of Dalits: Brahminism and capitalism. So one can look at him as today he is looked as the leader of the Dalits, but he had a very broad vision, and if one looks at his contemporaries, many non-Dalits were also his associates.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that analysis. And I think it's very helpful to then go from that analysis of this amazing individual who was part of this amazing time of the freedom struggle and so on, and go to the question of the Constitution. Because, although we consider Ambedkar the architect or the primary architect of the Indian Constitution, if we look at his writings, he himself did not consider the Constitution perfect. Rather, he considered it to be a kind of a compromise. Can you talk a little bit about what he meant by that the Constitution is a compromise?
If we want to look at what sort of constitution Ambedkar himself wanted, I think we should read States and Minorities. As a leader of All India Scheduled Caste Federation, the political formation he was leading mid-40s, he had written a document they called it so States and Minorities. There he had portrayed what sort of constitution he wanted. And if we read it today, very progressive idea. He talks of state socialism. He understands the challenge of majoritarian politics. He differentiates between communal majority and political majority. The challenge of majoritarian politics, which we are facing today. So he could foresee that in that document. So he had a very broad vision. He talked of land nationalization, and is sort of the way he's a Fabian socialist type of individual. So all sorts of progressive things he tried to underline in his own document. And but when he was made the chairman of the drafting committee, so he had to compromise. And 1950 in Parliament, he openly said that the constitution has failed its people, and I will be the first people. I'm the first person ready to burn it. So the limitations of constitution, which he himself drafted, were evident to him, and the and so I feel that the 1949, his very famous speech, one should always look at the way he differentiated between political democracy and social democracy. He said that in the Indian society, we are ushering into a political democracy, one man, one vote democracy, but a social democracy, one man, one value. That is a long journey, and also while dedicating the constitution, he also differentiated between constitutional morality and social morality. It's a long journey. So he was, when he was drafting the constitution, he was understanding the difficulties inherent in implementing it. And so the limitations of the drafts were also evident to him. And also, even if we take the draft, how to implement in the society, a caste-ridden society. So that that was also clear to him. So, and I think the idea of Hindu code bill, I think we should also discuss, if we have time, we should also discuss Hindu code bill, the struggle for Hindu code bill.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. Yes, so the Hindu code bill was another moment in Ambedkar's struggle for having a better constitution. When the constitution was adopted, the issue of Hindu code bill came. Dr. Ambedkar was a law minister in Nehru's cabinet. What was Hindu code bill? The Hindu code bill was tried to give rights to Hindu women in property, and also have monogamy. Hindus could marry a number of women. So the Hindu code bill tried to sort of give rights to Hindu women. And there was tremendous resistance to this Hindu code bill. RSS people, Golwalkar and RSS people, they laid marches against Ambedkar. And a conservative section of Congress also supported these people. They said that nothing doing. You cannot touch Hindu culture. So that was an interesting struggle which he laid for the Hindu movement, and he had to resign from Nehru's cabinet, mainly on the basis that he could not implement Hindu code bill. So that these are two parts of the making of constitution.
Yeah. I think, and this is still very relevant today as we're discussing things like triple talaq and polygamy among Muslims and so on. The RSS and the BJP have made a big issue of this, but they haven't made a big issue that basically the same polygamy is just as prominent in among Hindus as it is among Muslims. So I think it's still very relevant today. Unless you'd like to add on that topic, sir, I want to take us Hindu code bill. The code bill is for people who are asking for the pronunciation. This is, yeah. So my next question would just be, so going forward from that time, so we have, let's say we've been from 1920 to 1950 until now. Very briefly, let's talk about the period from, say, I don't know, the 60s, 70s until even maybe 2014. When we had, largely we had Congress governments in power. Largely we had a constitution that, for all of its flaws, and it had many flaws, at least it tried to curb some of the excesses around so-called untouchability and so on. But we still had massacres like Khailanji, Lakshmanpur, Chundar. We had the use of tribals and Dalits against Muslims and Christians in massacres. What do what can we, tell us a little bit about those events, first of all. So I mentioned three, Khailanji, Lakshmanpur, and Chundar. And then maybe we can talk a little bit more about the failings of both the state governments and the local government and the national governments that allowed these to happen.
The massacres of Dalits and tribals is a very tragic reality of independence India. It's a long history. 1969, the first massacre of Dalits took place. in Kizevanamani, in a village in Tanjavur, 1969, the Dalits, under the leadership of the Communist Party, had waged a struggle for wages, and for the upper caste people, dominant caste people, literally came to the hamlet and they burned down the hamlet in which 42 women and Dalits were staying. All the main folk had gone to the forest. They had run away. So 42 Dalits, women and children were burned down by the dominant caste. And what was what did the judiciary say about it? What was the judiciary? What was the verdict of the judiciary? The judiciary said, despite having enough proof about the participation of the dominant caste in the massacre, the judiciary sort of acquitted all these criminals, all these who committed that massacre under the specious argument. What was the of Kizevanamani? The shadow of this verdict still cast, still there. And if you look at any massacre, you look at Kerlanji massacre. What happened in Kerlanji? 2006, the Bhotmange Parivar, Priyanka and her mother and her two brothers. Priyanka and mother were gang raped by the dominant caste, and two brothers were very badly beaten, and all of them were killed. What happened after the massacre? The massacre took place in September. In October, there was no news of this massacre in the mainstream media. November only, because of the social media, it became public that such a massacre had taken place. So there was a conspiracy of silence. Conspiracy of silence. And what is the present status of this case? The High Court, despite the fact that the Bhotmange Parivar, Bhotmange family belonged to scheduled caste, and they were oppressed, they were killed because of their caste, they were discriminated by the caste because only two families of scheduled caste lived in that area. And the High Court refused to consider that case under the historic SC/ST Act, 1989 historic SC/ST Act. They said that no, it was a personal enmity, and it acquitted the main culprits. And this acquittal was challenged, and this case is still pending before the Supreme Court. Still pending before the Supreme Court. 2006 massacre of 4 people, and you look at any massacre. You look at any massacre. You mentioned Lakshmanpur Bathe. We can talk about Bathani Tola. We can talk about Miapur. We can talk about Chundur massacre, which took place in Andhra Pradesh. If we look at these massacres in Bihar, Lakshmanpur Bathe, Bathani Tola, Miapur, Ranveer Sena, a private army of landlords, led that massacre. It was active for around 6 years, mainly active for 6 years in Bihar. It killed more than 300 people. It's documented how many massacres took place. 300 people were killed. And what happened to the culprits? What happened to the leader of this Ranveer Sena, which committed this massacre? That Brahmeshwar Mukhia, he was acquitted by the court for want of evidence. And when Lalu Prasad Yadav had appointed a commission, Amir Das commission, to look into the role of this Ranveer Sena, when Nitish Kumar came to power, that commission, which was probing the involvement of different ruling class politicians with Ranveer Sena, it was disbanded. 2015, Cobra Post had done a sting operation of Ranveer Sena activists, and they accepted their participation in the massacres. So you look at any massacre of Dalits and tribals in India, you will find that people are acquitted. Punishment are rare. Rarely you get punished. People get punished, and the masterminds are never punished. Masterminds are never punished.
So who can we, I think there's a tendency, a rightful tendency, listen, unless there's accountability for these crimes, they will continue, right? So when you have upper caste, what's the word? Conspiracy, I guess. They're conspiring with one another to commit the crime, and then they are conspiring with one another to not give evidence. How can we ever have accountability, or is there some failure at the center that could make this more accountable? Is there some legal solution to this problem?
I think the manner in which the quote unquote upper caste or the dominant caste are still dominating the judiciary, the media. So the justice is becoming is becoming a mirage for most of the oppressed classes. With the one small example I would like to give of Bhavri Devi. Bhavri Devi was gang raped in Maharashtra, in Rajasthan, 1992. A film was also made on her life, her struggle also. But still, the culprits have not been punished. What was the judgment of the session court? Session court said that the uncle and his nephew were involved in the gang rape. So Indian culture is such a great thing that such thing cannot happen. So all these biases which are there in the society, they are very much there in the judiciary, media, and the articulate section of the society. So which has continuously denied Dalits, tribals, and the other oppressed people their rights. So it's a very really tough task, tough task. How to achieve, how to deliver justice to the really needy people. And if unless and until there is a big churning in the society, I don't think that's. Yeah.
But Ambedkar had, maybe you can talk a little bit about Ambedkar's proposed answers to that, because I think it had to do with his version of reservations. Would you like to talk a little bit about how do you think Ambedkar would see the solution to this problem?
Ambedkar knew, when Ambedkar was drafting the constitution, he had formulated the policy of reservation, affirmative action for the Dalits, for the scheduled caste, for the scheduled tribes. So for him, the affirmative action, giving opportunity to all these people, the oppressed people who have been socially oppressed for thousands of years, hundreds of years, special opportunities need to be given to them. That was his idea. That was his idea, and it's not was his idea. It was a part of independence struggle. Also, we look at Shahu Maharaj, Maharashtra. He had given reservation for the first time, 1902. 50% seats he had reserved for. So he was continuing with that legacy also. But he saw that when he was drafting the constitution, he had this policy. But what is the net result of this reservation? I was recently I came across reply by University Grant. I'm just giving one example. University Grant Commission, UGC, has given a reply to an RTI application by an ad hoc teacher in Delhi University. And he said that I talked about the teaching assignment, teaching positions, how many Dalits are there, how many tribals are there in the central university he's talked about. And the UGC's reply, official reply, last month reply says that 99% seats meant for professor's post, which are meant for the reserve post, they are still lying vacant. They are still lying unvacant, not vacant. So how can it happen? How can it happen? So it is happening. It is happening. And the dominant castes have still not taken very kindly to this reservation policy. And so you find how they sabotage it. They sabotage it by saying that in the interview board sits, they will say that suitable candidate was not found. You'll find upper caste people giving false certificate that such and such I belong to Dalit, and they are given jobs also. The SC/ST Commission, in 2 of its reports, has said that false certificates is a big problem. Thousands of non-Dalits, upper caste people are working at using false certificate, fake certificate, and are employed. So they have devised many ways to deny rights to the Dalits and tribals. So it's a big challenge before all of us. how we find a way out of it.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to note that Aradhita has asked a question. She's asking a very specific question, so I'll take it now. Otherwise, please, participants, please feel free to put your questions into the chat box and we will address them. If they're longer, if they're sort of bigger picture questions, we'll address them towards the end. If they're questions for clarification, we'll address them now. So Aradhita is asking whether we know the caste of the judges who sit on the High Court ruling in the case of Kelanji.
To be very frank, I don't know the caste of the High Court judges, but one related fact I would like to know, I would like to underline, since you have raised the issue of Kelanji. When I was talking about the conspiracy of silence for around this massacre, and interestingly, the SHO, the police officer, was a Dalit, the superintendent of police was a Dalit, the chief medical officer was a Dalit, was a scheduled caste, and the district magistrate of the Bhandara district was also a Dalit. So these four key posts were held by Dalits only, by people belonging to scheduled caste only, but they themselves participated in this conspiracy of silence. So it raises questions about the idea of representation also.
Yeah, no, this is confusing, and I think that's why, in my understanding of Ambedkar's proposal for reservations, it was a lot more Dalits were meant to be in there, but in a shorter term. So it was, the idea was you have a plan for getting rid of the concept of caste. And the way that you do that is put the people at the bottom, at the top, but temporarily, it should be phased out over 15 or 20 years. Yeah. Do I have the right understanding of, because I remember seeing this in one of Ambedkar's speeches. Am I describing it correctly?
I'm sorry, I couldn't get you, Samir. I couldn't get you. Sorry.
No, I'm just wondering about the difference between Ambedkar's original proposal of reservation and what ultimately became adopted in the Constitution. Because there were two different proposals, right? Ambedkar had a different proposal.
I would like to share my ignorance about it. I think that there was not much difference, but if you can enlighten me about it, you can enlighten me about it. But so what was your
I wouldn't dare to do that, but it's something we can discuss in a future webinar. Yeah. My understanding was that it was, first of all, he wanted a time bound, so maybe 10, 15 years.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. That was there. That was there.
Secondly, that the number of seats, the number of posts would be much, much more. So that you would have a forced majority of lower castes in very powerful places. And the idea being that this would over time very quickly attack the caste system at its root through political power. But that proposal was never adopted. So again, I will remind friends to please post their questions, comments. We will get to them soon. I want to then go to the second part of the discussion, which is really about, so we have in 2014, we have the Modi government coming to power. There have been Sangh governments in the past, but I believe, and you can share your opinion as well, I believe that 2014 is a real break because they feel a kind of impunity. They feel that they can do almost anything. And so in this context, we have, we have things like outside of the Jaipur High Court, there's still a statue of Manu. We have a kind of almost an ignoring of the secular nature of the Constitution and openly demonizing certain minorities and so on. We have lynchings related to what people eat, whether they're eating beef or something like this. We have recent cases, like maybe 10 days ago, of people being denied cremation in crematoriums and people having to, so what my question really is, what is the difference between, or do you see a difference between post 2014 and pre 2014 when it comes to the issue of Dalit rights?
Surely. I also feel that the ascent of Hindutva forces in the center has been very detrimental to Dalit and rights of tribals. The many examples you quoted, the cases of lynching the manner in which people have been targeted for what they want to eat. And not only Muslims have been targeted, Dalits have also been targeted, because the beef which is prohibited by these Hindutva forces, that beef should not be eaten. A large section of Dalits still consume beef, they have been consuming beef, and that was the only source of protein for them. So right from the fact that what you eat to the fact of the justice delivery, there is a broad spectrum in which one finds that things have really, really become tough, not only for Muslims, but Dalits and tribals also. 2 years back, one should talk about one should always talk about the judgment of Supreme Court. Two member judges had sort of watered down this SC Act. The SC Act is a very progressive act. 1989, the act was formulated by the then Congress government, and it's a very progressive act in the sense that it talks about uh, uh, punishing even the public official, government official. It has very interesting provisions. Very interesting provisions. That one of his provisions also was giving arms to the Dalits and tribals in a Dalit atrocity-prone area. Even the government law talked about distributing arms also. So that was the progressive act in itself. Two years back, when the two-member judge, they sort of revised it. So, and despite the fact that the act has been watered down, the government, there was the BJP government did not take any action, did not file any review petition. So there was a big mass movement, and then it was compelled to file a review petition. Or so at the level of law also, justice delivery also, or the manner in which they have tried given reservation to the upper caste, the manner in which the rapidity with which the upper caste reservation bill was passed by the BJP government. So at various levels, they have the present government has proved very counterproductive to the rights of Dalits and tribals.
So thank you so much for that, sir. There's one issue that I just want you to talk a little bit more about in specifically, and that is this question of why should there be a statue of Manu outside of the Jaipur High Court? Why is that still an issue?
1989, that statue was established by a few members of the Bar Council, Bar Association of Jaipur High Court. And immediately it was challenged by the Dalit and Ambedkar organization in Jaipur. And there was a stay, the members of Vishwa Hindu Parishad, they went to the court, Acharya Dharmendra went to the court, and stay was granted. So whereas the Dalits and the Ambedkar organizations, they demanded that the statue be removed, the Hindu people approached the courts. So the judiciary, they said that no, status quo need to be maintained, and the status quo is still continuing. 1989, when BJP government was there in power, that statue came up. For the first time, it was challenged in 2015. One judge came and he said that this issue need to be reopened. This is unfair. This is unfair that the statue of Manu is there. So there was such a tremendous protest of this move, that the issue has been forgotten by the administration again. So for the last 26 years, 31 years, the Manu statue is there, and the statue of Ambedkar is lying somewhere in the corner of the court. So it shows the mentality of the RSS, the Hindutva people, who do not want to disturb the arrangement of Manu as their sort of point of inspiration.
Yeah. I mean, just to tease that out a little bit more, because in 1989 we have where many things happened in that year, but let me just point out three. One is that we have the Caste Scheduled Tribes Act, as you've talked about. The second is we have exactly what you've been discussing around this placement of the Manu statue and so on. And the third is that we have the beginning of the agitation for the Ram Mandir, which, as everyone knows, just a few days ago, there was a big show about the Prime Minister doing some ceremony. I didn't pay much attention, sorry about that. But so this is something that's ongoing, and it all seems to have its origins. Was it a coincidence that all of these things happened in 1989, or what is going on at that point in time?
One can look at that. It was one can definitely find a coincidence also. We can just look at the interconnections also. Definitely, one can definitely find. One need to find, because it was a way of assertion. Slowly, the RSS and Hindutva people were asserting their power at various levels. They were testing their power at various levels. So in Jaipur, in Rajasthan, where they were in power, they sort of facilitated this erection of this statue, which sort of represented their ideology. So, and on the other hand, the Mandal movement was started. Mandal movement, the Kamandal movement, the movement for Ram Mandir, a movement to challenge the Babri Masjid, challenge Babri Masjid. They started, was sort of given more strength, was given more strength during that period of 1989. So the RSS and the Hindutva forces were asserting themselves in various ways, and they understood that these Mandal forces, the assertion of the Dalits stand backwards. It's a big challenge to them, and that way they looked at the Kamandal movement, the movement for Mandir. So the whole idea of Hindutva, I always maintain that the idea of Hindutva is basically they're trying to, if you look at the history of India, pre-independence India also, whenever Dalits and tribals and the OBCs have tried to assert themselves, so there was this reaction from them, reaction from the Hindutva forces, reaction from the quote-unquote upper caste forces in various ways.
Thank you so much for that analysis. Let me begin to move to the next question, which is really about what are the, how do we go from here? And I think in order to get there, so in 2014, I think there was a possibility, and maybe it still exists because of these beef lynchings and so on, that affected Muslims and also affected Dalits. There was a possibility for some kind of a broad coalition of minorities, including Christians, Muslims, lower castes, and others. But somehow we've left, I would say, the communist parties as well. Somehow that coalition has never really materialized. What is your analysis on is such a thing a good idea? And if so, why hasn't it happened yet?
At the immediate level, I think that it's a good idea that left as well as the Dalits, Bahujans, and minority forces, they should come together to challenge the hegemony of Hindutva, challenge the hegemony of communal fascism in the country. It's a good idea. It can be pursued, but it had its own limitations also, because if we look at the internal problems within the Dalit community, within the Bahujan community, within the minorities, such an alliance, even if the left wants, such an alliance is difficult to come up. And if we look at the Dalit caste also, the Bahujan caste also, there is a lot of Hindutvization in them also. The manner in which, if we should look at 2002, when Gujarat riots or carnage, genocide, whatever you say, when 2002 took place, the communal riots, targeted violence took place. What we find, what we discovered that a great section of Dalits also participated in targeting the minority. In significant sections of tribals also joined the Hindutva forces in targeting the religious minority. So so there are differences at the level of caste also. In Dalits also there are different caste, and a great section of them has also been Hindutvaized. So there are, despite being the fact that it's an interesting idea, and one can have a sort of a joint big alliance of all these forces to challenge Hindutva. But it has its limitation. It cannot be. The practical difficulty are there. Practical difficulties are there.
Great. So with that said, I think it's a good point to start thinking about the future. And I think on this question of Dalit and other minority unity, let me just ask you about one public figure, Mr. Chandrasekhar Azad, who, when he was being harassed and ultimately arrested by the police and so on, he at one point stepped out of the Jama Masjid in Delhi with a copy of the Constitution in one hand and a picture of Bhimrao Ambedkar in the other. I thought that was a very powerful statement of potential solidarity.
Yeah.
What do you make of figures like this?
Yes. I also that was a really inspiring moment when Dalits Ambedkarites were a section of Ambedkarites had went to Jama Masjid, and Chandrasekhar Azad crowd was there. So it was a big symbol. It gave a really big message to people. Or if you look at Jignesh Mewani, the struggle he led in Gujarat against the communal fascist government in Gujarat. So the fact that the Dalits and Muslims are coming together to fight communal fascism, oppressed caste and Muslims are coming together to break their rules also, and it's difficult to move ahead of that agenda. Make a bigger move in that direction. A spontaneous, we can definitely have such movements. We can definitely have such movements, but at pan India level, I don't think there can be such a mobilization case possible.
Fantastic. And I wanted to ask you, because when the right is so strong, it seems that any movement against it could be like a very strong movement. It could unify so many people. The right is both strong, but it's also very radical, I want to say. It doesn't represent a majority by any stretch of the imagination. It represents a smaller and smaller minority, but a more powerful minority. So when the Hindutva forces have this characteristic that they are in a position of ascendancy, they're asserting their caste superiority, they're asserting their religious superiority. At the same time, we saw after the 2019 elections, we saw these big protests led by Muslim women all over India, the anti-CAA protests and so on. Do you think that the Dalits movements have a role to play in that as well? We talked about one figure in that, but more broadly, is that one space that might lend itself to this kind of unity against the Hindutva forces?
Yeah. Shahid Bagh, it was a historic struggle, and it was a really inspiring moment. It inspired similar struggles at all India level. So that was a really big moment. And what one noticed that not only Dalits and tribals but other people also, a section of middle class also joined it at various levels. The Shaheen Bagh sort of inspired many movements. But it's a tragedy. It's tragedy that because of this COVID and because of this the manner in which the Northeast Delhi riots took place, the orchestrated riots took place. That movement has temporarily back in the back burner. This movement is on the back burner. But such movement gives us hope in these dark times. Such movements really gives us hope that things can be better. If we strategize ahead, things can be better.
Fantastic, thanks. Anything else? So I think that's a great place to begin to close our conversation and go to the questions that have come on the chat. But before I do, I mean, you said that these give us hope. Is there anything else that gives you hope? You've been in this space a long time, sir. You've seen movements come and go. What gives you hope for the future? What gives you hope for the next generations coming up?
Rosa Luxemburg was a great revolutionary. And I still always remember a statement, socialism or barbarism. So today we are faced with similar situation. Socialism is not a very powerful idea these days. You can talk of humanity versus barbarism. The big challenge is before us. The communal fascism, the communal fascist forces, they are the manner in which they are moving, and we need to understand that they have a bigger acceptability today. A large section of the Hindu mind, they have been able to capture the Hindu mind from the upper caste to the Dalits. So that challenge is very much there. But since that choice, we don't have any other choice. Either we go what Rosa Luxemburg said, the barbarism way, or we fight for humanity. So my hope is that, and as I said earlier, that the Shaheen Bagh movement, which inspired similar movements elsewhere in India, and there was response in abroad also, diaspora also, India responded. So such movements definitely gives us hope that if we persist with the idea of constitution, because all these forces have they want to discredit the constitution. They want to discredit secularism. They want to discredit the democracy also, the communal fascist forces. And I feel that the constitution values are a big thing, and they will not be able to, they will not be, temporarily they are definitely are, we are finding them victorious. The manner in which they are moving, the manner in which they have been able to destroy different institutions. But still, there is a rethinking within left and progressive forces of how to move ahead. So that gives me hope. The people's strength to say, never say die, and the political forces imaginative interventions, that gives me hope. But the challenge really tough challenge before us.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. With that, I'm going to go to some of the comments and questions that have come through. In case your statement is a comment, I won't necessarily ask Subhashji to comment on it, but I will just read it. So the first one is coming from Shamsul Islam, who says 99% of reserved seats for professors, just because they're vacant doesn't mean that nobody occupies the posts. High caste people fill these posts often. Yeah? Dr. Islam would know, as he has been a part of Delhi University for many years.
Yeah.
Second, he says it is crucial to note that the present rulers of India openly declare that they are RSS members, and according to the RSS, Hinduism and casteism are synonymous. Anything to add to that one, Subhashji?
The present rulers of RSS use the second thing, or Shamsul Islam's query. So Shamsul Islam's
This is Shamsul Islam's query, yes.
Yeah. I feel that what he's saying is correct. The posts are remaining vacant. That doesn't mean that nobody is occupying them. That's the manner in which they are. As I was explaining, the use of false certificates to occupy posts, to keep this post vacant, and saying that suitable candidates were not found, and putting people of the quote unquote upper caste in ad hoc basis, temporary basis. So that path is open to them. That path is open to them. So they must be. I don't have any figures with me, but they must be doing it because that is there. So Shamsul Bhai pointed to made an important point.
Okay,
and the second
great.
point I'm saying, present rulers. What is the point about the present rulers? You said.
Second point is again coming from Shamsul Islam, basically saying that the current RSS rulers, the current people in charge of RSS, believe that Hinduism and casteism are synonymous. There can be no Hinduism without casteism. Is what they're saying.
Yeah.
Let me move on to the point from Anil Chaudhary, who says, is the movement for participation of all castes as per percentage of population possible in India in all positions of governance, judiciary, and administration, as this can only percolate all kinds of services for actual empowerment? I think what he's saying is that reservations should be determined by the population percentage. So for example, if there are 50%, I don't know, Dalits in my district, then there should be 50% people in the governance, in all of the governance positions. What do you think of that suggestion?
I think the arrangements which have been made by the Constitution, the seats have been reserved for scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, OBCs, and especially challenged people. I don't think we'll be able to make any changes in that. Right now, we are not in a position to make any changes in that, because the Supreme Court has put a limit on that 50 only 50% seats where can be reserved can be reserved. So within that thing, we will not be able to make much changes. But yes, we can try our best that the best posts are fulfilled. Genuine people from scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and OBCs are given that post, and the post do not remain vacant, as the UGC report tells us. So that we can ensure, definitely ensure. But redistribution, as a population-wise redistribution, I don't think it's possible. It's a very impractical idea.
Your larger point is just that there are moments, and I think this is a point for us all to consider. There are moments when we are advancing as a struggle for human rights, for Dalit rights. There are moments when we are defending. And I think it is important to mention that we are now in a moment of defense. If we open up questions on constitution and so on, we will lose rights. We will not gain rights at the current moment. We need to defend those that we have. Yeah? With that said, let me go to the next question, which is from Aradhita. Thank you, Aradhita, for your question. She says, there exists a resentment among the upper castes. And then she says, I used to have this resentment myself because job positions which remain vacant for lower castes, while there is lack of jobs among people qualified. Without creation of more jobs, how can you remove this kind of resentment? We can't expect a class suicide for everyone, using the concept of the Marxist concept of class suicide there at the end. Any response to that one, sir?
I think that there is an element, the concern is valid. The concern is valid. I'm just trying to see the question because
it was at 6:30 p.m. from Aradhita.
Yeah, because I just yeah. So we'll get one first. Yeah. I agree with that. That jobs need to be created. Job needs to be created. So that is but the fact is that there are no jobs now. The public sector, the government has sort of put a lid on further recruitment. The Dalits and the tribals can be accommodated in the government jobs also only. So on the one hand, that there are no new opportunities are available, and secondly, we need to sort of popularize also that there is the common sense that Dalits and tribals, there is a sort of resentment. What she is pointing out, the upper caste, quote unquote resentment against the Dalits, against the tribal, not understanding the fact that there are no jobs. The unemployment is a big problem. Unemployment is a big problem. Lack of jobs is a problem. So the jobless growth is a reality today. Unless and until the progressive forces are able to communicate to the upper caste, that problem lies in the system, the capitalist system, which is not creating new jobs. And look at the system. Don't look at your neighbor who is a Dalit and a tribal, and don't try to attack him or her. So that.
Yeah, thank you for that. I will also refer listeners to a previous podcast we did about 2 months ago now. It was done through the lens of COVID-19. It was called COVID-19 and the Economy, but addressed this question of jobless growth and so on. The next question is coming from Porus Dadaboy. Thank you, Porus, for your question. What is the economic wealth or earnings of Dalits as opposed to Hindus or Muslims? What are the education levels in minority communities to show discrimination, etc.? He feels that we've been talking too much about RSS and not enough about Dalits. Thank you for that criticism for us. Please go ahead, sir.
I'm just trying to see what question. Yeah. What's the economic wealth or earning? What is the education levels in minority to show distribution? Dalits are, yes, Dalits, a section of Dalits are definitely employed in government, have definitely got government jobs. A section of Dalits are definitely becoming sort of joining the rank of industrialists. So a section of Dalits are really gathering wealth. But as opposed to the traditionally rich people, rich families of Vaishyas and all, I don't think, I don't have any data with me to explain what is how much wealth the Dalits have gathered. But the situation is not that was in 1947. Situation has definitely improved. So the discrimination is very much there, and so we need to look into the issue. I don't have any much thing to say about it.
Yeah. I mean, I think what we can say is that overall inequality in India is much more than it was even 20 years ago. Yeah. So I believe, that would be the case within the Dalit community as well. There would be a small percentage, a very, very small percentage of Dalits who are quite wealthy. And here I'm talking about probably less than 1%. And then we would have the vast majority of people, and this goes for everyone across caste lines in India, the vast majority who are barely getting by. So I think we can say with confidence that that's the case. In the case of the Dalit community, it may be worse than in other communities, as when looked at globally for India as a whole. But the story for everyone is not good in India, so it certainly won't be any better for Dalit communities. That said, can we go to Shine Kapoor? Thank you, Shine, for your question. Shine says, this is an enlightening session. How does the new education policy perpetuate caste, if it does? Why do Indians in the West support the RSS? And here it may be good maybe to mention the Cisco thing where we see caste even in Silicon Valley coming up. So we have the people who are against racism but in favor of caste. The Indian diaspora failed to connect the dots. So two questions I think there, one on the new education policy and the second on the diaspora.
The new education policy, the document doesn't talk of reservation. The new education policy document doesn't talk of right to education, the historic act which was formulated by the Indian government, the then Congress government. The new education policy talks of duties, doesn't talk of rights. It talks of making people always is talking of duties only. So the vision of the makers of this new education NEP 2020 is basically a Brahminical vision, because under Manuvar, under the idea of Manu, Dalits have only duties. They don't have any rights. So when you write in the very document, you don't talk of rights. After 70 years of the Indian Republic, if a document comes up, it doesn't talk of any rights. Then one has to watch carefully. Whatever might be the Modi government says, talks about it. If the right to education, the act has limitations. But if you don't talk about it, or you look at the one of the interesting policy which is talking about school complexes. The NEP talks about school complexes. So what does formation of school complexes mean? It means closing of schools. They say that if this particular school doesn't have many students, then the students of that school can be accommodated in the other school complexes. since 2014, we have seen this process, which started from Rajasthan when the BJP government was there in power. More than 20,000 schools were closed under the name of adjustment. And when a school is closed, who studies in the government schools? The Dalits and the tribals and the minorities and the poor people study in a government school. So 20,000 schools will be closed in Rajasthan. And where did the Dalit students? We don't know. We don't have any idea about where did the Dalit students go then, or Haryana also, in Maharashtra. So in many states, this policy has already been implemented, and a new edition policy NEP 2020. So it's sort of formalizing it under the very interesting idea, very catchy idea of having school complexes. So at various levels, NEP seems to perpetuate the Brahminical version of the worldview of RS. It's trying to communicate, trying to implement, trying to reinforce the Brahminical version. And secondly, the second question about the support of diaspora to RSS. Yes, the diaspora, large section of the people who are staying in the West are supporters of RS. But I think we should go for the social composition of people who are there in the West, in the United States, or say Britain. Around 40 million people are there. 4 million people. 4 million Indians are there in US, out of which only 1.5% are Dalits. So 98.5%, what caste they belong to? Most of them, or large section of them, are upper caste. So, and the upper caste, I said, they definitely, the upper caste people, they have never supported reservation. They have always opposed the assertion of the Dalits and the tribals. So the whole agenda of RSS, which is essentially anti-Dalit, which is anti-tribal, it very suits with, it resonates with their worldview. It resonates with their worldview. We sort of denied rights to Dalits. So since RSS is supportive of that agenda, the large section of people who are living in United States or the West, they are supporters of RSS. So one can easily see it. Many things have been written about it also. They have their own caste association are also there. Rajput Association, Jat Association, all these associations there. And where these associations, they sort of have organized meetings and all. So RSS is supportive of all these efforts. So these upper caste people, so they sort of supporter of RSS, and which is evident in the Cisco case also.
For sure. I just point our listeners to one exception. I agree that that is the trend, especially in the United States. But there is an exception in that there are communities in Canada and in the United States that go back to the Ghadar movement, which was part of our revolutionary movement. And if people listening want to learn more about that, I'll refer you to the 2 weeks ago, we did a webinar with Dr. Jagmohan Singh, where he took us through that history, a very interesting and inspiring history of the diaspora mobilizing in support of the freedom struggle. So I'd ask our listeners to please go back and find that on YouTube. It's a very enlightening talk. Can I go to the next questions? Jagmohan Singh has again commented on the national education policy. Thank you for that, Jagmohan Singh ji. But we've already pretty much said what he has said, so I will not repeat it. The next question is from Mahesh Chandra, who says, how do you differentiate between nationalism and patriotism? Nowadays, in the name of Rashtravad, which I guess is translated as nationalism, a lot of activists are treated as anti-national, although they may be patriots. This is interesting discussion. Did you want to say something to that?
I think I would like to skip this because I personally, I would like to Because
I can say something on this if you don't mind, which is just to say that I think that there are, I'm not sure about nationalism versus patriotism. In some countries that distinction makes sense. In other countries it doesn't. But I think we have to talk about, I think we have to really question what we mean when we say that we're national or patriotic or whatever, and really talk about values more than countries. I have more in common with, someone who grew up, outside of India. I have more in common with people who speak my language in Pakistan or whatever, than with someone from Tamil Nadu, for example. So I think it's a little bit more complicated than just nationalism.
I think you, one small point which I want to make: when you oppose the government, the manner in which we try to conflict, the Hindutva forces try to conflict government and a nation. That's a very problematic understanding. When I oppose the Modi government, not that doesn't mean that I'm opposed to the Indian for our nation. When we opposed the emergency imposed by Indira Gandhi, we were not opposing in India. We were opposing a particular regime. So opposition to a regime should not be constituted as opposition to a nation. And that understanding they have tried to perpetuate. They have tried to conflate the nation with the government, and they are trying to, as rightly said, that activists are being treated as anti-nationals. It's a very dangerous development.